Good morning and or afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here on a mid-December day, busy holiday season. Although for some people, it's not that busy. December is kind of a nice week or a month for a lot of people for work, but not so much for tribal folks because we tend to have a lot of grant reports, year-end grant reports due in December. But we really appreciate you being here, and we're just letting people in as they show up. And also, I apologize for sending so many emails this morning with reminders about how to join, because it turns out I think one of the initial ones I sent you back to the register here page as opposed to the join the meeting page. So I had to resend the confirmation email so that people could join without having to re-register. I promise next time I will not clutter your inboxes with a bunch of reminder emails. So thank you for your patience. You would think after all these years now of doing Zoom and online stuff that I wouldn't still be making these mistakes, but I promise you that at least once today we'll be saying, hey, so-and-so, you're muted. So, all right, I'm gonna pass it over to Angie. We have a lot on our agenda today, so we want to be mindful of time.
All right, hi everybody, and thanks again for coming back for our second session of the Tribal Health and Adaptation Peer Learning Roundtable webinars. Again, these are our monthly opportunities to come back together for an advanced training with folks like you who have experience doing tribal adaptation work on the ground. We're so happy to have you back. If you weren't here for the first round, welcome. We had recorded the first session and we're super happy to make sure you have access to that to get caught up. We kind of learned about each other and we learned about the training and we got excited about what's to come. So feel free to get caught up, or you can always just reach out to us if you have any questions. All right, let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about what we're up to together today. So first what we'd like to do is just do a little regroup. It's been a month since we've met. We had given you some readings and some other materials. We're going to check in with you on those things. And actually, one of those things is the community agreements. And so in just a second, I'll have Shasta to talk about that. We're also going to give you a couple minutes just to do a meet and greet. Part of what we want to do is help you all get to know each other and be able to have a few minutes to talk. So we'll get into triads for a short meet and greet, so you get to meet 2 more people. Then we're going to do a little bit of a review of just some of what Tribal Climate Health Project has to say about this particular topic. Sorry, before we do that, we're going to review an updated schedule for this training. So we took your feedback and we also took your speaker suggestions. So if you volunteered to speak, we're starting to plug you in and we want to talk about that with you a little. And then, like I said, we're going to do a little bit of a lesson on the topic of the day, approaches to scoping climate and health adaptation based on tribes' unique needs. Short, though, because really that's just to prime the pump, because we have 2 speakers that are going to speak to that topic today that we're very happy to have with us. And these are, as always in these trainings, these are going to be sort of participant speakers. So we're asking each of you, because you have experience, to share it where you feel comfortable. And we're going to have lots of discussion and Q&A following those speakers, so we all get a chance to reflect on this topic and wrap it up into what we're going to end up calling our wisdom wells, which is where we're going to kind of capture the wisdom that we are gathering in these meetings. Okay, so Shasta, I'm going to hand it off to you just to go over those community agreements we started talking about at our first meeting.
Thanks, Angie. And again, hello, everybody. As people are joining us, I'm just so happy to see the names and faces of my friends and colleagues. So if you want to just take a moment to read over some of the community agreements that we came up with in our opening meeting last month, and let me know if there's anything that you would like to add. I think that we probably could have spent more time on this, and I also could have explained it a little bit better last time. But what we're really asking for is those items and rules of respect that we have for one another in this space, to make sure that we're sharing in a way that is inclusive, that we're not calling people out, instead we're calling people in, and we are making sure that everybody feels like this is a space where they are welcomed and being heard. And sometimes that means that we need to write a few things down just to remind people of what we're all doing here and the level of interaction and respect that we want to have for one another. So just review that. And if there's anything you'd like to add, feel free to put it in the chat. And I believe that we may also have this in our Google Drive. So if you feel like going and looking at that and adding a few other things as well to this list, stuff that's important to you, then feel free to do so. I think most of us here are grown-ups, and well, I won't speak for myself. I think the rest of you are grown-ups and we know how to be respectful of one another, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded. So that's what the community agreements are about. All right, Angie, let's talk about the schedule.
All right, next up, actually, so we're actually going to go into, next slide, please, Serena. All right, so we're just going to kind of regroup from our last webinar. So Serena's going to give us some updates just on where these materials live and how you can access them. And then we're going to talk about our readings. So go ahead, Serena.
Thanks, Angie. Let me get my browser window up so you guys can see what I'm looking at.
And in the meantime, I'm going to put some stuff in the chat just to make these links a little easier for you to find, including the first one here is the peer sharing form.
Okay, perfect. So hopefully you guys saw in the confirmation emails that we were sending out that we created a Google Drive. This was something we discussed last time just to make it easier to access everything. So you can also just directly download our materials. So you should be able to see this folder if you're signed into Google. And we're going to make folders for each of the webinars, but the main ones that are out here are the peer sharing sign up form, which you should be familiar with. We shared last time. And then the new document here is this resource hub. And even if you don't have access to all these folders, because if you don't have a Google account, we're going to be adding everything to this resource hub, so that you can at least get the links to these individual files. So I just want to quickly show everyone how to navigate through. So if you open up this outline on the side, you can see the headers, and you can see here there's webinar 1 resources, webinar 2 resources, and then our schedule here on the first page, which you can also click to take you down. So for example, our webinar 1 resources, you can find the worksheet, all the notes that we took on our mural board, that peer sharing sign up form, any recordings, slides, the wisdom wells Angie mentioned, and then also action items, which we will do our best to send in the follow-up email shortly after each webinar, along with any resources shared. So these I'm actually pulling from the chat box during our webinars, and a lot of people are sharing great things, so I want to make sure we're keeping track of those. So I'll do my best to summarize and add things in here. But if you go down to webinar 2 resources, you can already see here the link to download worksheet 2. And this is what you're going to want to download sometime during this webinar. Just as a reminder, I would suggest creating a folder or somewhere on your computer where you can download by clicking this button here, so that you can keep track of your notes as you are completing these exercises and reflection activities. So I will double check that all the links are in the chat, but please feel free to bookmark this document, especially because this is just going to be our home for all of our materials. So definitely let me know if you have any questions. And also, just a quick on the community agreements, they are here as well if you want to directly put some suggestions in here.
And I sent this worksheet out with one of my multiple emails this morning too, so everybody should have it.
All right, any questions on any of that? We really appreciate the feedback we got from some of you at our first session, which gave us a good idea to compile these resources into some shareable files. All right. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to go back to talking about our suggested reading. So in addition to giving you all this stuff, in between the last meeting and this, we asked you to, if you had time, nobody's grading you, but to try to take a few moments to take a look at our suggested reading. And the suggested reading for this month was the Climate and Health Outlook. So the most recent one. Now, the Climate and Health Outlook is something that's actually a new publication that comes out from the federal government. And the federal government's Health and Human Services Department newly created an office for climate change and health equity and environmental justice. And this group is really, we like them a lot because they're really good at providing data in a usable way, and they're really interested in serving tribes and other communities that are particularly vulnerable to climate change. And so we suggested this reading as well as some prompts. And so we're wanting to have a little discussion here before we break into the topic of the day, and some prompts here. So I'm just going to wet the whistle a little bit by giving you some prompts, but talk about anything you like or want to talk about as you read this publication. I think Serena just put the chat in right now. It's not huge, so you can even scan it right now and share any thoughts that you have. The first question we have for you is, do the perspective forecast for your region listed on page 1 align with your expectations? How or how not? There's really just a paragraph that summarizes by region what the outlook is for this season. This season, what they're looking at right now is, what can you expect to happen in the climate that might affect health in your community by region? And so in the next 3 months. So it was November, December, January. And then we're asking, have you or a tribe you've worked with applied for funds through the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program? That's one of the programs that's recommended or promoted in this publication. We just want to know, is that something that you've used? Have you considered using it? And if you have any experience you want to share. We have been told by lots of tribes that this is one of their favorite, most successful programs. And then just in general, did you like this publication? Was it useful to you? Summarize what you're taking away. So if any of that speaks to you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'll be quiet for a minute while folks decide whether or not they want to respond. You could put something in the chat, but otherwise just raise your hand.
John, I saw your mouth moving. Can I call you out? Oh, wait, no, except we've got hands up first. So Tim from Grayton, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, thank you for the resource. This was awesome. Tim Campbell, Grayton Ranchery. I'm the grants administrator, and I apologize for not being on the last call. I was at a DOE conference in Denver, but have caught up and really like this resource. Couple of things to think about, I guess, or what happens here in our tribe is a lot of the outlook is based on kind of predictions. So it'll be interesting to see if they come true. We know we're in drought, and I just got off the monthly governor's call with tribal leaders. State of California, of course, is taking this very seriously and want to network and partner with tribes for available resources, planning, funding, those type of things to help alleviate any impacts. Regarding LIHEAP, our tribe is a consortium member for the region in our area where LIHEAP is eligible to help our citizens. I like how the Outlook posted, that they had got a waiver to do other things, which was news to me. So I would have not seen that any other place than the Outlook, which was very helpful. And so I think this is a great tool. I was unaware of this tool, so I'm glad you were able to provide this to us as a resource, and just thank you.
Oh,
thanks, Tim. That's great. Really appreciate the feedback. And Kendra, I'm eager to hear what your experience is or what your feedback is. Well, where'd she go?
Yeah, thanks. I'm here.
Okay.
I was lowering my hand. Yeah, so similarly, it's a nice, clean, short summary that's really helpful in some ways. It's not helpful at all for Alaska, unfortunately. So if they could come out with one that's Alaska specific, that would be great. And of course, just Alaska is like saying the Western U.S. or Region 8 or something, right? So that was part of it. But the LIHEAP was new to me, and that was really good information. And I passed that on to our facilities, and they were actually pretty excited about it. So that was a really useful resource that we didn't know anything about. Yeah, and I liked some of the material on the heat-related illnesses. That was really helpful.
Thanks, Kendra. And I noticed when I was reviewing it that they've got an email address on the bottom that says, please send your feedback. So if you want to send feedback saying, hey, we could use our own that's Alaska specific, they probably consider Alaska to be part of Region 10. which, that's Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska. At least that's the EPA region. And a lot of times the regions are the same,
Right.
but they should do something that's specific to Alaska. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, the interesting difference there is when these heat domes set up off the West Coast, it brings rain into Alaska. So we get the exact reverse of what's happening on the West Coast. And that happens both winter and summer. We get these reverse effects if these either heat or cold or precipitation domes kind of set up somewhere. We get the reverse weather.
That's fascinating. I'm not seeing any other hands right at the moment, so I'll give a little bit of my own feedback. I love this, and I'm really hoping to develop something like this that is specific to Paula. It looks like this comes out on a quarterly basis, and being able to give our area a little bit more specificity for what we can be expecting, because I want to be able to just look at it and say, here's what's happening for us. We're not in the Southeast or the Midwest, we're in Southern California. Catherine.
So one of the main things that I saw missing from the health outlook is the actual effect of the increase in temperature on the microbial populations that affect everything, such as the algal blooms. They're not talking about how water temperatures have increased. Algae loves to grow at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and that we're seeing much larger algal blooms just invading the reservoirs. We're not seeing any talk about the bacterial growth in the meadows that, such as the hoof rot, that are now infecting our elk here in Northern California. There is a lot that is missing. It seems like they're only basically concerned about the droughts and the extreme weather events, but they're not connecting the actual change in temperatures to anything else, which is kind of an oversight or overlook.
Yeah,
That's an excellent point. Go ahead, Angie.
We're in touch with the guy who oversees this, and he's pretty great. He keeps asking for feedback. So I really think, if you guys don't mind, I could take what you all are saying and actually share it with him directly. He would be very interested in this kind of feedback. But yeah, great input. Thank you for participating. Anybody else have anything to say on this particular reading? Anything burning? You won't find, this is the only thing I've found that provides a short-term projection, like a short-term outlook that's by region. So it's useful because you can, if I were in your position and working within a tribe, I'd take it and say, whoa, what's coming? What short-term things can I implement right now knowing what's coming? Or do I have the right things in place? Or can I at least share this information with those that need it?
And it looks like, John, you are unmuted. Did you want to add something? I guess I'm just calling him out. But, oh, I see my friend Lisa has her hand up. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, others. The thing that struck me was the way they cordoned out the regions. Those are just way too broad. I think that I'd like to see, and I've said this in many areas and many times, that they really do need to bring the scale down of what it is what information they're providing for us. Because for instance, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have very different climate issues here than you do in Paula. And so being able to I don't want to say dummy down, but that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure the right words, but bring it down to more smaller areas. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. And that's what I was thinking when I was talking about doing something that's more Paula or Southern California specific. Okay, now I see John's hand up. So John, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a little speaker issue. No, I agree that having a more localized look at this, specific to the area of the tribe or the region that it's in. I know that the broad look is fine for this type of document, but for specific tribal purposes, we've actually looked at developing something little similar to this, just based on what impacts that climate change has had on the tribe and the seasons here, and what we've seen in the past, especially the tribal chairman and the elders, how they've noticed that, you know, summer's been stretching further and further, or at least summer type weather is stretched further and further in past September into October, and we're getting red flags and stuff like that even in November. And then one of the tools that we use as well is the National Weather Service. They have every once in a while during weather events or stuff like that, or even just calling them up, they put together webinars based on what's going to be happening in the next 5, 6, 7 days in our region, and how that's going to impact scar areas from burns, how that'll impact mountains and what have you. So I think there's an opportunity to take this and probably scale it down to what would be most beneficial to tribes and their own region. But it is a useful tool.
Thanks, John.
Right.
And it looks like Catherine has one more comment, and then we need to move on to our meets and greets.
Yeah, that's a great aspect that's missing, is that microclimes. California is split into so many different microclimates because of our topography. We have, I don't know how many mountain areas here, and after we have these sides, the rain side and the rain shadow. We have all of those throughout California. We have the high elevation of the mountains that are no longer getting snow. And the microclimates are different as you go up and down the state, even east and west too. So, and in every microclimate, you're going to have a different effect on the landscape and on the people, the animals, and even the jet stream. So there's nothing either here about the jet stream. So how has the change in the climate controlled how the jet stream now goes through the United States? I mean, I believe that there is a lot more variation. It could be either wider, it's more intense, I know, because of the increased water vapor that's in the air. So that's why we're having more storms. So there's nothing about that either. That would be a great addition.
We can
Thanks,
certainly make sure
Catherine.
this feedback gets passed along. I think that's all really good.
Yeah, this is great. And I'm just excited to see that we are already generating so much discussion. I mean, maybe next time we'll have to put more time for discussing our suggested reading. But now we want to do a little bit of the introductions, and then we'll have more time for discussion at the end. So if there's more you want to say about this, we certainly can. So we're going to put you into groups of 3. You have no choice in the matter. It's just going to happen to you. You'll get put into a room and talk to one another and you know, talk about what you're doing and who you are. Here it is. Introduce yourself. Share something that's on your mind about your tribal adaptation work. And Serena, I think you're the one who's in charge of this, right?
Yes. So there's one room that has 2 people, just FYI, but so you'll have 5 minutes and you'll see that 60-second pop-up come up when you have a minute left. All right, and I'll put this in the chat as well.
So we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Have fun.
Quick question, are these 5 minutes of
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Oh no.
I'll put it in the chat. They're not recorded, right?
No, they're not recorded.
I'll go to
Thank you.
Lisa's room and see you. Oh wait, Lisa, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Was your question about recording?
Yeah.
Yeah, not recorded.
Good, thank you.
Oops.
Okay.
Bad about that. Also, I'm realizing if I send it in the chat now, they're probably not gonna see it. But I can.
Oh, do they not? Do they not get chats when they're in a breakout?
You know what? I'll jump into room 7 and see what happens.
Oh, Tina's here.
So yeah, we're a little behind. But
Yeah.
it's okay. I'm gonna try to catch up a little on my section.
I'm gonna just broadcast the message out because so what you have to do is you have to send it in the chat before releasing everyone, and then it'll stay in there for them. But after they're in there, they're not going to receive chat. So
I see.
next time I'll make sure I have that copied and pasted more handily. Hi, Tina.
Hello, is everyone in breakout rooms?
You and your microphone, we can hardly hear you.
I know.
I
So
heard breakout rooms.
Yeah, everyone's in breakout rooms right now.
Yes. We just put them in there, so another probably, well, it's already been 2 minutes. They have another 3 minutes. Tina, I was updating our Monday board with the people who are here right now.
Mhm.
And I noticed there's 2 people who must be new or didn't register before. So after the webinar, would you be able to just check if new people registered and then add their info in? I added them to the bottom. But yeah, afterwards. And then also if you could, again, double check if there's anyone I missed. I'm kind of just like doing it live for attendees.
Yeah, I think Lori's probably not yet. Oh, hi, Christian. You're coming in just a little late.
Hello.
So folks are in breakouts, but do you want to just hang out? It's only got another minute or so left.
Yeah, sure. My apologies for trying to play. I was just in and out.
Oh,
of
no problem.
It's all good. We understand.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. Just wanted you to know why we're just kind of
hanging out. Huh?
hanging out. Yeah. Will you remind me where you're from? Your name is so familiar.
We're from Saboba.
Oh, that's why.
That's
Yeah.
why.
Hey,
Yes.
yes. Nice to see you again.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
I know you guys are working with Alex a little bit. We've been talking to him a little.
Yeah. We're going after that Caltrans climate change grant in efforts to update our vulnerability assessment and then finally develop a adaptation plan. I know you guys helped the tribe for me to create that vulnerability assessment, but it's been a little bit since then. So we're just looking to update it and make sure everything's updated.
Yeah. He's asking me if I want to provide any support. So yeah, happy to help in whatever way I can.
Awesome.
If you
Thank
guys are
you.
making progress. I think that grant is still, it hasn't yet come out yet. The solicitation.
No. I think it might be out. I believe the deadline is February.
Okay, so you guys have time. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, I think folks are coming back, right? They're closing in 52 seconds.
Yeah. So now we know next time folks did the reading. So we can have more time for discussion. It's a good thing.
All right, people are starting to come back. Hi, everybody. Was that too short or what, guys? Or was that enough time to at least say a hello?
It was perfect.
Oh, good. Awesome, yeah. Sometimes it goes too long, you're like, now what? All right, we're just letting the clock run out and folks should all be streaming back in now. All right, welcome back, everybody.
Some people got cut off in the middle of saying great things, which is always what happens when we do these breakouts. So sorry, John.
I know. We talked too much about you, and we didn't get to say anything about us.
I know. That's why I shouldn't even come into your room. What the heck?
Well, thanks for that, guys. Give us a thumbs up if you thought that was a good amount of time, or thumbs down if you think more time would be needed.
Oh, we need more time.
Boo, more time.
All right, take it. We're learning. All right, cool. Okay, oops. where did my screen run off to? There we go. So our next thing that we want to talk about is our series and just what the schedule looks like. You guys gave us good feedback in the survey. We talked about it at our first session. This is just checking back in and making sure that we're providing you with the most useful training possible. And when we say training, we're really talking about peer learning, right? So giving you guys a facilitated way to have these really good discussions. So we haven't changed the first or second topic, and even the third topic seems like it was pretty widely appreciated. Even the fourth topic. So where we're really making the first big change there is on March 16th, where we kind of merged that topic. It was about decision making and progress tracking and sort of just the management after planning is done, scooting some of those topics over to let's see, the operation. So August 17th, where we're already talking about operations and management. And then we're making space there then to talk about, we're going to have like a kind of a free-for-all on exposures, meaning tribal tips to tackle certain exposures and impacts. And that's just going to let us, rather than dive in by strategy type or these other topics, we're going to dive in. What's up? What's working in wildfire? What's working in drought? What's working in temperature? And just give a chance for folks to talk about that. The other, you can see in red some of the other minor changes that are happening to the schedule throughout, where we're sort of making sure we're covering certain topics where they fit under the topics that were already suggested. May 18th, there's a lot of interest in funding, so we're making sure on that one we're also discussing how to pursue funding as well as conducting advanced planning to prepare for adaptation project implementation. The other thing we're doing here is to outline who of our participants is going to be able to speak to these topics. So you can see today on December 15th, we've got Lori Montserrat and Daniel Moya. You'll hear from them soon. And then you can see just throughout here, I basically took what you guys put into the sign-in, where you either are in the survey or in the sign-in form. If you suggest that you could speak to a certain topic, I placed you here. Now it doesn't have to stick. So this is what this discussion is about. If you see a topic here that you think you'd really like to speak to, or I have you up here and you're like, wait a second, I decided I don't want to, that's what we want to hear about. And so Catherine, you look like you have some feedback.
There in just a lot of these webinars that I have been attending, the one thing that I have noticed that is missing from the trainings is how to actually take an inventory of everything that is in the watershed.
Oh.
Because if you do not understand everything that is in the watershed, something will be overlooked. So for example, topography, the trees, how many acres of trees you have, how many roads there are, what kind of animals you have, your stormwater system, everything. And if there are any abandoned mines on near your area, what exactly is in the watershed that affects you that can either exacerbate climate change problems or help climate change, help to adapt to climate change. So really understanding the inventory in the watershed needs to be added.
Do you, would you say that process happens as part of a vulnerability assessment?
Yes, because you have to know what is in your watershed in order to determine your vulnerability.
Well, I think that sounds like a really interesting topic that maybe we can cover in January when we're talking about conducting tribal vulnerability assessments and making sure that that's something that gets shared. It sounds like, would you be willing to speak to that?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, so we can add you there. I know Elizabeth Perez had some other options. She might be willing to speak to some other topics, so I'll talk to her about that. Elizabeth, you're not here today, right? I don't think I see her.
She says, no, I'm not here.
Getting bumped, Elizabeth. No, I think she was happy to speak to other topics. John,
John has his hand up, but before he says anything, I just want to reiterate what I put in the chat in case you didn't see it. If you can rename yourself to put what agency or tribe or organization you're with, just float on the little 3 dots that are up next to your picture and put that in there. That's really helpful so we know where people are coming from. All right, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be willing to speak on March 16th with regards to wildfire and drought and then storm flooding, how those are all interrelated. The other stuff is related too, but yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, maybe we
Okay.
can put the link to the form, back in the chat so that people they don't have to scroll up and you guys can jump in there and just fill yourselves out. And yes, thank you. Now I can see where people are from. Love that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's helpful. And then Asamu is saying, could we talk algae blooms in March as well? Yeah, we can. So what I was thinking is maybe I would find a speaker for each exposure, or if somebody wanted to talk about a batch of exposures in March there. So it sounds like, John, you're willing to speak to a few of them. Is anybody else really passionate about your experiences, lessons learned, successes dealing with any of these exposures, and you'd be willing to speak in March?
This is Tim. I could talk about a little bit about wildfire, but I was thinking more about public health, but just tips and resources, how to secure scarce resources during disasters, wherever that might fit.
Okay.
Prevention, education, outreach.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any feedback or want to volunteer for any of these topics? You can see at the end, we've got some highlights here, places that we could use an extra speaker.
I'm going to just be direct and call out Sammy from Palma, who's working on her PhD on this stuff. And so, Sammy, I think there's a lot of places where we could hear your voice on the work that you're doing on disaster response and resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Wherever would be helpful. I mean, I think I'm sort of at that point in my education where I know enough to know what I don't know. So I feel like I'm not an expert in anything. But I'd be happy to speak on, to speak on anything.
Did you
Thank
see
you.
I stuck you on April 20th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see that one. Yeah, that'd be perfect.
All right. Great. Well, there's gonna be more chances to volunteer, so we'll probably do this, not this every time, but at the end of every session, we'll talk about the next session and make sure we have our speakers lined up. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm looking forward to a really great year. Oh, Colleen, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, one thing that's really specific to Alaska that I don't see on any of these lists is food security or food sovereignty. We live, 3.5 hours from Anchorage. And as prices of oil go up or we're not able to get food, that's something that all of the native villages around us have expressed immense concern about. And that would be something maybe to add to the list somewhere.
Yes. We only have 12 webinars, so it's like I would wish we had one for every strategy type, the groups of strategies. I think it might maybe work best in August. Possibly. So let me know if you think that makes sense. And is that something you would like to speak to, Colleen?
I'd be happy to speak to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, nothing works if we don't have food.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bottom line necessity that I know a lot of native villages in Alaska deal with.
I think that might also work on April 20th with our other speakers that day. But when you're talking about hazard mitigation, I mean, certainly a lack of food is a hazard that needs to be mitigated. And it's an emergency. It's public health. Like you said, without food, the rest of your health kind of doesn't matter because you're starved. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tim was saying March, it could work. It could work anywhere, honestly. I mean, again, food. I feel like maybe for the next time we should all bring snacks so that we can be like, look, food is really important. I have a pear right here. It's that time of the year where you get gift boxes from consultants, and I got a box of pears, which I was kind of bummed out because I wanted chocolate, but I'll take what I can get.
I'll trade you. I want some pears. I'll give you some chocolate.
Right on. All right, well, I'm going to rework this based on your feedback. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on. There's a lot to do. We're already a little bit behind schedule. So I'm going to get through this little small lesson pretty quickly because I want to hear from you all. These are coming from slides that we use in our Tribal Climate Health Project trainings that we've done in the past. So I'm not going to really talk at you very much. I'm just going to try to lay the framework, lay the foundation for this conversation, prime the pump a little, so that you all kind of understand the topic we're going to discuss today, which is approaches to scoping climate and health adaptation based on tribes' unique needs. So it's kind of like assume we're talking about the very beginning of a tribal adaptation process. What do you want to do? What do you want to look at? What are you concerned about? And how are you going to make sure that the tribe's concerns and interests and needs are going to be well planned for? And so just a little note on, the purpose of adaptation planning. You all know climate change is going to affect almost everything that within a tribal community, from wildfire to community health, economies, tribal culture, and sovereignty. And these projections are showing that these changes are going to become more extreme over the next decade. So adaptation plans are generally serving to move communities towards a state of better preparedness, more resilient. Your tribe can make clearer decisions if it better understands the magnitude, likelihood, frequency, and timing of threats imposed by climate change. And those are happening all over the country, including folks like you who are out ahead and doing this kind of work to prepare your communities. Next slide, please. But they look different. They look different all around the country, and there's no single right way to do it. So there's all sorts of different approaches. One way to do things is what we consider top down versus bottom up. So that means, are you going to take information that's coming from big agencies and use that to inform your climate adaptation plans? Are you going to take information from your community, from your TEK, from your elders, from your youth, and do a bottom-up approach? I don't really like the directionality of that, but that's somehow some of the approaches that we read about it in those terms. Or a braided approach, meaning we're going to take information from all directions and make sure we sort of weave it together to make some decisions. Are you going to have a comprehensive approach? That means, are you going to focus on something very specific, or are you going to focus on kind of cover it all? And that might depend on resources, but some vulnerability assessments or adaptation plans are looking at a particular pick. That might look like they only want to look at drought. They only want to look at flooding, or maybe they only want to look at certain assets. They only want to look at just new trust lands. They only want to look at a certain facility, or locations. What locations? Some tribes, to set the boundary around these kinds of adaptation efforts, are they looking at just their reservation lands? I'm working with a tribe right now that wants to look at their ancestral lands as well. So kind of getting the parameters around what is it we're going to look at? What is it what is trying to adapt? What parts of our community are we looking at? And then individual versus collaborative. That just means, are you going to go it alone, a single tribe, or are you going to work with other tribes or a consortium of tribes? What partners are involved? There's trade-offs with that, right? Sometimes it's quicker and easier, faster to go alone, but then you can't leverage resources as well. You can't get buy-in from each other or support mutually beneficial goals at the same time, less partnership. And then, weaknesses and strengths and just process. So on the right, there's all sorts of different plans, also sorts of different approaches to process. A lot of it basically can be boiled down to, first, you're going to look at the problems that are coming from climate change, and then you're going to try to solve them. And so a lot of them are in circles. We really like the circle aspect because it's showing that this is an ongoing process, continues. It's not a one and done. But so just on your own, reflect on, when you first started this process, we're going to talk about all this later, but how did you make these decisions in ways that reflect your tribe's unique priorities and other important factors?
And Catherine actually has her hand up, so she may want to reflect to all of us. Catherine, go ahead.
It seems like some of the agencies for a portion of adaptation is actually relocation. And I want to just voice my objection to that. There should never be a focus on relocation at all, because that just means they're trying to get away with not doing anything to address how climate change has affected the communities. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I understand that too.
Okay, next slide, please. So this is just to say that, again, there's no one right way to do it, right? So like I said, most of these are kind of these two-pronged approaches. You're going to figure out what the problems are, and then you're going to try to solve them. And so in public health, if you're coming from a public health approach, you might do a community health assessment and then a community health improvement plan. those things could factor in the projections associated with climate change and the projected impacts. If you're using a climate adaptation planning approach, which is kind of our cup of tea, you typically do a climate vulnerability assessment. That's where you're looking at the risks associated with climate change, and then you follow it up with a climate adaptation plan. Some folks put those together, but really you're trying to identify climate risks, and then you're trying to solve for them or mitigate them. And then the emergency management industry, that world, two-pronged too. They do a hazard mitigation plan, and then they come up with that emergency management plans. And so all these things, initiate other plans, policies, and actions, but those are options. These are all options for approaches. Next slide, please. This is because we've looked across a lot of approaches and best practices. This is what we came up with, which is trying to show that yes, this is an ongoing cycle of a process, but the heavy work usually happens at the very beginning, where you're establishing your first vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And then you go through a process of adopting, implementing, evaluating, and updating, and that's a continuous improvement process. But I think everything that's out there is basically saying to prepare to address the impacts of climate change on your tribe, it's critical to first understand your tribe's unique and most significant vulnerabilities, including health. Next slide, please. And so we're not going to get into the steps, and I'm not going to prescribe to you what steps you should have taken or have taken. You're going to, in our next round, you're going to tell us what steps and processes you took in your own vulnerability assessment to help educate us all about what works. This is what we often see that tribes do in the very beginning of the process. So, and this is sort of on the topic of today, which is, what is the scope? What's the scope? What are we going to do here together at the very beginning? And so things that you consider might be direction from council. Did you get a resolution? If so, who was designated, lead staff? Those folks probably are going to look at resources, capacities, and limitations. Some of those might come from your funding source if you got a grant. You might look at this point at who's going to be your partners, including any folks that you might need to bring in from the outside, and then setting the parameters of the assessment. So, right, we already talked about like those boundaries, what exposures are really of concern, what kinds of impacts do you want to look at? You don't have to look at everything, but I've seen some that's focused specifically on an assessment for health and social. Maybe, how do you know? How do you know what your tribe really wants to look at? And that really is what we should talk about today. How do you make sure whatever you do is rooted and centered in what your tribe really needs? And then how are you going to do it? So that's the last one, select an approach. Like what are the planning framework or steps that you're going to use? So that's all I wanted to say there to sort of prime the pump on this conversation. And then we've invited two speakers to help us kick off this conversation. Before we go take our break, I want to ask Shasta if she wants to add anything on to what we just talked about, particularly her experience at LF doing this work.
I'll just say that when I started doing this work, this is not my background, my professional background at all. I'm an anthropologist, and apologies for being an anthropologist because we've done some terrible things. But trying to make up for that by doing the right thing by the tribe that allowed me to do my research with them for so many years. And when I got to this, doing these vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans for the first time, I was completely overwhelmed. It's not like we don't know what climate change is and that we can't see the effects for ourselves when it comes to changes in weather patterns and storms and drought and flooding and all of those things. But it was really, really hard. And I'm thinking about what Kendra was putting in the chat about how she's being made responsible for coming up with this broad-based, what are all of our vulnerabilities in the community versus let's focus on a few things. It's a lot of work, which is why we are doing this now that I've had much more experience and been fortunate to get the funding to be able to have roundtables and webinars like this one where we can talk to one another. So whether you're an expert and you've done a whole lot, or you're like I was 6 or 7 years ago where I was completely overwhelmed, it's a basic process, but it's not basic work. And so hopefully, as we're talking with one another, we can make it easier for everybody. And already today, in our first few minutes of discussion, the things that you all have brought up are things that I'm going, oh, a little exclamation point is in my head. And we can all learn, and I've learned so much. I hope to learn more from you. And I hope that this isn't unfamiliar to you, what Angie just presented. If it is, then I hope that it helps you to be able to, develop a process to be able to get to at least some sort of an end point. But like Angie said, it never ends. It's constantly cycling. So when you go back to revise what you've already done, maybe there's some new things you can do to make it even better. And Kendra, I'd love to come up there and help you because I love your part of the world. And any excuse to come to Alaska. Catherine.
I think that's why it's really important to really do a comprehensive inventory of your watershed, because a lot of people do get stuck in specifics of the details and you don't know where those impacts of the details are coming from. So once you step back and you take a look at everything that's in the watershed, put it on a map, put it wherever, and you can see, because everything is connected, as we all know, everything is connected. And so once you see the connections, then it's easier, for me anyway, it's easier to come up with a vulnerability assessment and where things are going to happen faster or and so on. So that's why it's really important to know the watershed, know everything that's in your watershed. And then that way you can step back and take a look and see how things are connected. I think that will help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And I also just want to add that there's always new stuff coming out there. I read an article yesterday about how those who tribal nations that have clam gardens and clam beds, whether currently or as part of their traditional practices, would crush up the clam shells and put them back into their beds. And now we've got some scientists who are working on that, and they're saying actually doing that is helping to reduce the amount of seawater acidification that is affecting the clams as they grow, makes their shells thinner, makes them less likely to be able to achieve full growth and be harvested. So this is traditional knowledge, and it applies to a climate effect, which is increased acidification of the oceans, and it's already being done. It's something that we can spread as an idea for those who have those coastal resources. And I mean, not that you need Western science to tell you that you're doing the right thing, but it's one of those things that helps us understand ways that can, traditional knowledge that can be used to help with these effects. And that includes the whole watershed, the ocean, everything. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
So Celso let me know that he has some comments. Let's take his, and then we're going to go to a break, and then we're going to bring our speakers in.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
So if you could go 2 slides back, no, the other one right there. So we have a climate adaptation plan that we put together, and we do have every section that you have there. We have human health is one of our main concerns we worked on our climate adaptation plan. For the climate adaptation part, we're looking at water availability. That's my department. And then we also have an emergency management approach. So we have all 3 approaches in our climate adaptation plan. And this was discussed, and that's what we wanted as the O'odham people. I took it to most of my people, villages and the districts, and this is what we came up with.
That's awesome. We would love to hear more about that.
Okay, then the next thing is that I had asked if I could screen share, because we do local drought monitoring here on the nation, O'odham Nation. That's my job. So let me see if I can do it really quick. Here's it.
I just gave you access, so you should be able to.
Okay. Okay, can you see it, or did I go out?
Yep, nope.
Okay, so this is what I do. I use the U.S. Drought Monitor for Arizona. That's on the web. You can get it from NOAA or NIDIS. And so what I do is that every 2 months for us, I talk to the Natural Resource Department and also to the NRCS field station. And so what I do is for our area, the O'odham Nation is right here. It's right here in this area. That's where we're at by the border. And so when I get all the information, then I talk to the different departments. And then I tell for everybody, I send this to the programs and departments and say that most of our nation is in, D0, which is abnormally dry. Forage is still limited to for livestock and wildlife, and soils are still dry and fire danger is high, and the daytime temperatures are moderate at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what I do every 2 months.
This is awesome, Celso. This is exactly what I need to be doing for our region as well. And you can see it's not just useful for Tohono O'odham, it's also, you got other tribal nations in this region that you could share this with. So
Yes.
yeah, get me on your email list. I want to see what the weather is like and the forecast is like in your region.
Okay.
Thank you, Celso. So
That's
we're going
it
to
for
have
me.
a really good half-hour conversation after the speakers, where we're all going to get to share a lot about what we're up to. And then we have all these other sessions too. So, okay, just so you know, so we got 5 minutes. We're going to come back and hear from these speakers. And I've asked them to speak about, what does the beginning of this process look like? How do you protect health? Meaning, what approaches are you using and factors that you're considering when helping a tribe prepare to start this work? That conversation we just had, where one tribe really needs to talk about drought and another tribe might need to talk about algae and another tribe has another thing. How do you make sure you're looking at the right stuff and setting yourself up to do it? Okay, so see you at 11 and then we'll have our speakers. Ourselves a little. Okay, so as we come on back, I am just going to set up our first speakers. So we're going to do this every time we meet. We're going to have a couple of speakers hearing from you, hearing from your experiences. I'm going to try my best to have, as many of the tribal representing participants speak as possible, and all of these. In this case, first we're going to hear from Lori Montserrat. She is actually an employee of the state of California in an agency called Cali PA and an office called the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. Her role has been to work with tribes very closely in the process of understanding their adaptation needs. And so Lori is going to talk to us a little bit about what she has learned by working with tribes in California. All right, Lori, I'm going to pass it on to you. Thank you so much for offering to speak.
Thanks. And I think you're driving my slides.
We are.
Awesome.
You can let me know when to go forward, and then if it's all right, I'll send you a 2-minute warning.
Thanks, Serena. Go forward. There we go. I'm Lori. I work with Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, which we lovingly call OEHA. And I feel like a bit of a poser here. I'm not a tribal member and I don't work for a tribe, but I work with tribes. And I just want to share some of the knowledge I've gained from tribes on this adaptation plan. Next slide, please. So the first thing, and again, I may be preaching to the choir here, is when you're doing this process, insist on your rights. Don't let the feds or the state or a grant agency or anybody else buffle you into thinking that you don't have rights. You do, and take care of yourselves, take care of your tribes. Protect your data, it's yours. Have a plan for it before you start the process. Where are we going to host it? Is it going to be on a shared drive? Who has access to it? Who's going to be able to take it away later? And in the process, are you going to do this in-house? Do you have the staff and the staff time? If you hire a consultant, is it somebody you can trust? I was recently at a conference, and a consultant that I know was supposed to be there representing a time spent their whole time drinking and gambling. So if you hire a consultant, make sure it's a consultant you can trust. And if you're working with the feds or an outside agency, make sure you're at the table. We in the government, we mean well, but what I see is we often plan around tribes, even if it's a tribe we're supposed to be working with, and don't let it happen. And for the state and federal folks that may be here, if you're working with a tribe, be an advocate for that tribe. If your supervisors are trying to get you to make decisions without the tribe you're representing there, push back. Thanks. Next slide. And this is a slide that represents a dear friend who is such a little gentle flower in any meetings. I was with her in a meeting with state agencies, and they were talking about how to get tribes to apply for grants. And Shasta, in her delicate way, said, well, if you're going to ask for waivers of sovereign immunity, Paula's out. Mic drop. And I don't think that she may not even know how much of an impact this made, but later the agencies got together and were talking, you know, and they were very excited. And I said, did you hear Shasta? And there was a big pause, and I said, there will be no applications. And they changed. They dropped the waiver of sovereign immunity. So push back. Next slide, please. The climate change process is a community process. You're there representing your community, and you don't have to be the expert. There are so many places that are great to get information from. And if you need help, like digging through the information, which can be overwhelming, ask. There's lots of people that can help. The easy tool is a tool that Angie put together, and I've been using it for, I think, 2 years now, and I still have to kind of open it twice. I open it once and I see the small font and I close it, and then I open it again. It's a great tool. It has wonderful resources, but it's overwhelming at first. Next slide, please. And then if it's important to you, it's important. Each of the tribes are different. Each of you care about a different thing. And whether it's, you know, heat mitigation, caring for a specific species, whatever it is, if it's important for you, it's important. And don't let somebody tell you that it's not. I hear other people working with tribes and they're like, oh, well, you can deal with that later. If it's important to you, it's important, and insist on it. And these are some of my favorite species, tan oak mushrooms, which I call matsutakis. I'm a big mushroom forager. You have the hitch, which is a Clear Lake species that is really endangered right now, just terrible. The pupfish from Owens Valley, one of my favorite species. And of course, this poof poof, Karuk's poof poof. This is a indicator of stream health for Karuk. And it's just, how can you not love the poof poof? Seriously. Next slide, please. And small changes for your tribes can have big impacts, and you may want to consider documenting them. Things that you may just do without thinking, changing the time or the date of a ceremony. At first you may think like, oh, we'll just do it another time. Document that kind of thing because it's important and it can really show a trend. Regalia making in Clear Lake, the Pomo tribes found that the flicker, which is a really cute little bird with beautiful bright orange feathers that's used in making the men's headdress for ceremony and dance, is endangered now. And that's a big deal. This is an elderberry bush that's in the picture. And some tribes have noticed that the pith, the cane inside the elderberry, is smaller, and that's impacting the music of the tribe. They use the clapper sticks. And so, of course, access to water, which is a big thing, which you'd think of documenting. But think about the small changes as well. Next slide, please. And again, if you need help, ask. There are a lot of people that can help you. They can get you a long way. There are vulnerability assessment outlines, adaptation plan outlines that are out there that you can customize, rip and tear, and make it your own. But people are here. I had a tribe, she's become one of my friends. She texted me and said, hey, I'm having trouble converting units. US EPA says they want their units in micrograms per liter, and we have it in parts per billion, and I don't know how to convert it. And I was like, that seems weird. Send me over the papers they sent you. Well, she sent us the papers. We looked at them, and it turned out that US EPA had made an error. the units that they were asking for were incorrect. But she had already spent 3 days banging her head against the wall trying to convert units. And, sometimes just asking for help will get you where you need to go. Next slide, please. And again, this is hard. Looking at climate change and the impacts it's having on all of us is really hard. Take care of yourself and take care of your tribe during the process. This area is up here in Mendocino County where I live, and it's an area the locals called Blues Beach. It was recently given back to the area tribes, Coyote Valley Pomo, Sherwood Valley Pomo, and the Round Valley is Indians, which are Yuki, Pit River, Pomo, Nomalaki, Concow, and Walakai. And while I don't expect you to remember all those names, those are individual tribes that were driven to Round Valley, and that's where they live now, but they're still here and they're still important, and this is their land. Thanks very much. If you need anything from me, you can hit the next slide. My email is here. And if it's easier for you to text me, you can always text me. It's my personal cell phone, so you may get memes or jokes as a response, but I'm here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lori. We're gonna take questions for Lori after our next speaker, and that was awesome. Lori, I would invite you to also put the link to your most recently released report, if you'd like, for folks. And I'm gonna make that a suggested reading down the line here. So, but Lori's been hard at work here in California. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Right. Excuse me, I want to also just note something that all the information that Lori shared is information that the tribes gave permission to make public. So if you were wondering about that, yeah, that was a very, very important part of this whole tribal indicators process, was what can we share and what should we not share. So that was all done with permission.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shasta.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Serena, we're gonna go to our next speaker. And again, you're gonna have a half an hour when we hear from Daniel for Q&A and discussion. But Daniel Moya is from the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency. He's an emergency manager and playing a role as tribal liaison. He sits in this really interesting place. You're gonna hear from emergency management, climate adaptation, and public health, working with all the tribes in New Mexico. So we're gonna hear from him about what he's learned about approaches that tribes are using to make sure that their needs are being met. All right, Daniel, we're going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. First of all, it's a pleasure, and thank you for taking time to listen. I'll make this kind of quick, and it's basically, there's a method to the madness that I've used to implement the strategies for working with the tribes here in New Mexico. There's 23 tribes, approximately 200,000 individuals, covering millions of acres. And we have everything from forest to absolute just desert. And we work with everybody in between. So one of the ways, I used to work for the US State Department. So I pulled my strategies from working with those agencies that work in and around the US State Department. I brought them here and began to develop the programs for the tribes. So as you move up north, you have a lot of forests, and you move across the state, you have basically the Rio Grande that cuts through the state. All the tribes are located along the Rio Grande system. And within those areas, it's checkerboard. And obviously we know what checkerboard is. For some areas are native, some areas are non-native. So what I started to do was develop programs that would incorporate not just the tribal-based societies that dominate a given area, but when it comes to state and federal funding, I also began to incorporate the non-tribal that were in these checkerboard areas. And the way I began to do it is, if you look at the words here, it says critical facility. So what I began to do is I began to identify certain spots or agencies as critical facilities. And what that means, that in the time of an emergency, these are going to be the facilities that we call on. Early on, when COVID began, a lot of the tribes were saying, well, we need funding to build or to help upgrade our storage facilities so we could have long-term food areas and medical areas and things of that sort. But FEMA and areas of the government weren't really funding that, because they felt, well, you have IHS and you have the state and you have these hubs. So what we had to do is we had to redefine how we were going to create an agency that would work in the times of drought or extreme weather scenarios, whether there's ice storms or snowstorms, floods, tornadoes. New Mexico is one of those areas that has everything. So I began to identify these areas as critical facilities. And suddenly, when they're redefined with the exact same purpose, it is re-recognized by our government as being a critical facility and in need. And when they began to develop these, I said, well, if we're going to distribute 100,000 boxes of food throughout our tribes, what about those individuals that live within the exterior boundaries and are non-native? Or let's just say, for example, we have employees that live within the boundaries. Do we leave them without food? No. So what we started to do is incorporate them in this food distribution programs. And the state began to recognize why we were asking for such amounts and began to fulfill them. So it was this great way of recognizing the need and then filling it. And then as you go down, it says, highlight the importance of community-based partnerships. One of the things we began to do is a lot of Native tribes began to create a lot of NGOs. And with these NGOs, they also help with food distribution. And these are very vital. They're vital to the assistance of what we call, or what we identified as urban Indians. So because we have tribes from all over the nation living within our state, we wanted to make sure they were not forgotten. So these community-based partnerships were really important. And we also began to identify those as critical facilities because in times of need, snowstorm, ice storm, flood, tornado, we're going to rely on them to do food distribution, not just to the indigenous populations that live in their vicinity, but also the non-native. So they became a very important product. Next slide, please. Please tell me if I talk too fast. I just have thousands of words and all these thoughts. Anyway, so what I ended up doing is Santa Fe is the capital of New Mexico. And because we have hubs situated in different areas of the state, we don't necessarily have hubs located within the tribal areas. So I began to develop a system where we could use a northern EOC, and that's all the tribes living north of Santa Fe, a southern EOC for all the tribes living south of Santa Fe, and then the western hubs for those populating the Navajo land, which is also several million acres. And with that, we were able to identify enough money and funding for the state and the federal government to come in and start to fund these agencies. And it's been an amazing process because for the first time in many, many years, the tribes are now really pulling together and they're working toward the funding, the development of these northern, southern, western EOC hubs. And with that, they can begin to create agricultural systems. So if it's going to be an EOC, we want to make sure that in the time of an emergency, where do we get fresh product? Some of these EOCs are outfitted with slaughterhouses, so you can actually take in USDA beef or you can take in wild game. We've separated these areas so you can actually have slaughterhouses in 2 different areas within EOC packaging and then have it shipped out to those in need. And this is what we're outfitting each of the EOCs with. We have these meat product packing systems. Now we're actually developing the agricultural greenhouse systems. And with those, we are incorporating site-specific and site-scaled wind turbines that never sleep, constantly generating energy. And then you have the solar panels. And we are incorporating every possible thing that we can. We're working now to develop a water purification system that will pull different types of gray water from areas, rechannel that into growing the greenhouse product. And what's nice about these greenhouse products is it does not have to be all for lettuce or cabbage and salad greens. What we're doing is we're creating a section of these greenhouses for traditional grasses, traditional plants. So we're able to take those back and put them back into the environment. And we call this hazard mitigation because this now deters erosion. So we're actually doing a bunch of different things simultaneously using the same product, just trying to maintain the funding while at the same time creating a system that works best for the tribe and best for the environment. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, as it says here, we got 23 tribes, and we're just here to further enhance their emergency management programs, and this is how we're doing it. So we're not just going and building a warehouse and saying this is where we're going to store the snow plows, this is where we're going to plant or store the seeds. We're creating a facility that can be, it's like a multifaceted warehouse. And this is what's working for us here. And if it worked for us here, we've kind of, in a sense, I took what the US State Department is giving people around the world, and I brought that back to Mexico, and this is how we're rebuilding our tribes. It's a new system of development, and it's working for every tribe, nation, and pueblo here in the state of New Mexico. So we're actually using their plan to build our plan, and it's a great system. That's it.
Oh my gosh, I'm just jumping right in. Sorry, Angie, I'm cutting you off because this is, you probably saw me shaking my head and grinning and grimacing, and because I have no poker face. Please play poker with me if you want my money. What I'm really fascinated by is the fact that you are using a State Department model for countries outside the United States. And I think what's unspoken here is that look at all the work that we have to do within our boundaries that state is doing outside of the United States. Just goes to show you how much need we have that's not being met. So I can see already in our comments here, I asked, does anybody else have anything like this in their region? Tim says, is there a framework that we could use? And Lori, since you work for the state, I'm kind of like, hey, let's use some of this new money that's coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, because we're in the process of doing consultation on climate change funding in California and how to deploy it on something like this. We have 106 federally recognized tribes in California and multiple non-federally recognized tribes that the state acknowledges. And this would be amazing. So sorry, I had to jump in because I have no filter. So others, let's get some feedback on both of our presenters, and thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Absolutely. And if I could,
so let's take
really
questions.
Oh, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
If I could just add really quick. What's made this really simple for me and this project is the leadership here at DHSEM. I sent a couple of messages to the individuals from Alaska and one to California. And what I did is I correlate a tribe with a specific country, and whatever I did for that country, I minimize it or I just compress it and I put it into that tribe. So I understand what to do and why to do it. So it's been pretty cool.
Wow, that is amazing. So of course, whatever questions you all have, and Colleen, I see you have your hand up, but before we get to you, these are some of the questions that we want to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so. And we have a mural board. For those who weren't with us last time, the mural board, it's kind of like a Google, what's that other system that Google uses? Anyway, it's where you can put in your little sticky notes with your thoughts or your questions, your ideas. And so you can put those in the mural, and we'll also have obviously the out loud conversation for folks to give their feedback or ask questions. So there's the link to the board. It's also in, Serena just put it in the chat. So if you want to go there and start answering these questions, but Colleen, go ahead.
I was so excited to hear this talk. So thank you so much for sharing all of your information today. And thank you, of course, for hosting Daniel. That was so pertinent to our community in Alaska. I showed up as a climate change coordinator, and we have a lot of community gardens going. But as you know, our climate can be difficult to start, like an agriculture, permaculture, culture. So I have been looking into, because a lot of our limitations are that, hey, we're growing all this food, we're trying to be self-reliant, we're trying to overcome changes in our subsistence resources. But once we have it, we don't have the ability yet to process or distribute it. So that was our next step in our community, like food resilience, food security growth. So I'm so excited to hear about your projects. I had seen them online, and I think that our goal was really just to model what you've already done. So congratulations, and I think that's such a big deal.
Thank you, Colleen. You know, Daniel, do you have something that you could point people to, a link where this framework is written up, something replicable? We'd like to put that in our resource hub.
That's actually our next goal, because one of the things that's happened, we went from COVID, and just as we thought COVID, oh my God, finally we got a hold of it, forest fires. It lingered for months, you know, like a couple of hundred forest fires, and just as that subsided, floods. And so we're actually only in maybe the second week of some sort of understanding on how things are going, and now winter's here. So, you know, this emergency management kind of thing is a little interesting, but we're working to develop a program like that. Tomorrow's meeting with the Hickory Apache is focused around this, is how we're going to put pen to paper, develop this, and create this plan for everybody to see and use, and then modify it as needed, area specific.
Yeah, we'd love to see that when it becomes available. Lori.
I just got to say, Daniel, that is just flippin' brilliant. And I love the idea that there is also a slaughterhouse available. I don't know if anybody else liked that, but I was like, oh my gosh, there is often such a need for food, and especially good fresh food and meats. And to have someplace where you can process it is often the stopping point. I live on the north coast of California. It's Mendocino County. It's not the boondocks, but we don't have a way to process meat up here. There's not a slaughterhouse within 200 miles. And so it's just, the whole plan is brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to make another note as we're looking for other people's hands, that I have made the observation in meetings with federal agencies before that I think that tribes should, or I should say the federal tribal relationship should be nested within the State Department, because isn't that supposed to be the agency that does nation to nation relationships? So that's another reason why I was thinking, what a great thing that you're using that model. And also to Colleen's point much earlier when we started about talking about food sovereignty, check it out. We're talking about food sovereignty. This is huge. So I would love to hear from anybody else about your thoughts about the issue of food, or even ways that you have implemented some food protection. So for example, I'm not sure which tribe in Arizona it is, but they have a solar field that they've put up, and they're using the shade that comes from the solar installation to plant food underneath the solar panels. And that way they are more protected from heat and able to grow more food in that way. So you can combine the elements of your adaptation to do more than one thing. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. There's more disasters than just climate related disasters, but there are plenty of disasters that are going to be and already are occurring because of changes to the climate. So they definitely are the same topic.
If I could add to that really quick, some of the solar design panels that I studied during my travels was the fact that there's some transparent ones where as you can grow below the solar panels, if you put them high enough, the transparency will allow enough filtered light to go through, and it'll actually develop your garden. So they have transparent solar panels that actually do two different jobs. It's pretty cool.
I have never heard of such a thing. Catherine.
And one thing in talking about food sovereignty, I think that's the best way to actually build up the immune systems of people, because our food is such garbage now. If you go to the store and you purchase that, they've genetically modified everything. So if you can actually get seed and have an organic garden of your own and not use those chemical fertilizers and grow good, healthy foods, the number one immune protector or enhancer is healthy food. So that goes along with it. And then that way, I mean, like the COVID shutdown, it was devastating. And the one thing that really disappointed me throughout the entire 2 years of it was that there was never an emphasis on healthy food. It was always the shot, the booster, the next shot, the next booster. Never once did I hear anyone talk about boosting your own immune system naturally through healthy, good, whole foods. That is your number one defense to any virus, anything. Because if you have a healthy immune system, your body will kill the virus. So I think that is worthwhile to actually emphasize on developing food sovereignty amongst nations.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. And I'm seeing some other people as they're adding things to the board here, talking about, you know, healthy food and the difficulty of processing and distributing. But I wonder if anybody can speak to, since you brought up the pandemic, to how some of your pandemic response can be modified to also be part of your climate change response.
I just have one more quick thing to add to that. Because I know a lot of people, indigenous, they eat beef and so on and so forth. Well, cows are not indigenous to this continent, and therefore the indigenous body did not co-evolve with a lot of the conventional foods that people eat. So it's important to know what your ancestors ate and bring those diets back to the forefront. That way your body can actually be healthy. So that's really important.
Anybody else have any comments on food? Or I'm seeing some great stuff in the chat too. And actually, Liz, Elizabeth, I wonder if you want to unmute and talk a little bit about what you commented on in the chat.
Well, I'm from Norfolk Rancheria. I would show my face, but I'm just kidding. I'm actually fighting the cold myself, and I don't look that great right now.
Understood.
No, but food sovereignty is a real thing, you know, and my generations of family members, you know, my tribe from Norfolk Rancheria, I don't think anybody on the call is from there. It's right outside of Yosemite. I mean, we have some pretty extreme poverty levels. Even though, yes, there are casinos that exist within tribes, our tribe has been fighting for a casino for the past 20 years. We're kind of getting there, but even though, like, economically, we are in dire need of help. We don't have a lot of resources within our tribe to even go after a lot of these grants. And when their grants are available, the other tribes that have more resources, by the time we get there, they're gobbled up. Nothing against the tribes that have the resources, but it's a true fact. So one of the things I would say is, you know, setting aside some of the programs and even taking a look at different policy, set aside those that are economically stable and wealthy tribes, have different programs that are tailored to tribes like Norfolk Rancheria, Santa Isabel, some of the harder hit tribes that don't have those resources. So we have the opportunity and have the put something in there for some type of technical assistance to help us apply for some of these projects and programs. And that comment in there about my family members, you know, there's definitely something related to the food sovereignty and what people can afford to eat. Over 5 members of my family, including my sister, she has stage 3 cancer. 6 children, one is an adult, you know, ages 2, 4, 6, and 10. You know, it's an awful thing, and there's not a lot of resources. She has stage 3 cancer. And they don't have enough food, how would you say, healthy food to bring that into their diet. My grandmother just had stage 2 cancer. Luckily, she's, you know, doing better, but my sister's, you know, still fighting with this. And it's a real thing. It is an absolutely real thing. And I'm not sure who said that about the pandemic, talking about boosters and all, we absolutely do need to take care of our own people and start talking more about how our health and what we put into our bodies, how it affects us physically and mentally, and fighting a lot of these diseases like cancer and all the things that harm us. And yes, I agree that taking a look at what our ancestors ate is there's a lot of things that we're just allergic to, our bodies do not respond to. And I'm a strong believer of that. Sorry that was so long, but
that's great. This is exactly why we're here. And I'm just thinking, as I'm looking at the board as it's shaping up, that I think a lot of this stuff can go under those constraints and landmines. You know, what I'm thinking about it, for constraints, we can talk a lot about the ancestral foods and traditional foods and what's natural and what we've adapted to. And then yet at the same time, it's really hard not to eat Cheetos. And I mean, I make it sound sort of silly, but that's certainly a constraint that I think a lot of us have, is that it's hard to overcome the habits that develop because you get used to eating what's available. And so I know, even though we are developing a community garden here, oh my God, Lisa, guacamole and chips and salsa, that's natural. That's corn and avocados and tomatoes. All we need is some squash to make it, fully well-rounded. But that is something that I think has been hard, at least for me and Paula. One of our constraints and landmines is actually getting this information not just out to the community, but finding ways to encourage the community to do some of these things that we're asking them to do. It's a very specific example for us, but of course we're in Southern California. We're drought stricken here. We get all of our water from the ground. It's all groundwater, and we don't. Tribal citizens who live in Paula don't have to pay for water, which means that there's not that same incentive to save in terms of what you might have to pay for your water bill that people who do pay for their water might have. And it's been hard. It's been hard to get people to internalize that you're not just paying with money, you're paying with the fact that this is water that's not being replaced due to drought conditions. So it's hard to incentivize people to do something that is hard to do, like not eat Cheetos. Osama.
Can I, Shasta, just step in really quick? I want to make sure, because we're going to have, we have 10 more sessions after this. We're going to dive into different sort of steps in the process. So this particular, and this is a really good conversation because I like where it's going, where we're talking about what are the tribe's needs, food being a big one. But I want to step it back a little just to say process. What does it look like for a tribe to understand its unique needs? How do you get there? What do you do to understand it so that at the end of the day, all of this adaptation work should amount to mitigating some of the risks that are coming, solving some of the problems. So you want to set yourself up beginning of the process to really understand what needs you're trying to address, and wanting to talk about that process a little bit more. And I really like that we heard from the state who's telling us about how they go about trying to understand the needs of the tribes in their state so that they can serve them. How does the tribe itself go about understanding its needs so that they can serve themselves? Okay, so I just wanted to get us sort of oriented to what's on the mural here, and continue to put your Post-its down on these topics, and it's going really, really great. Osama, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to something that Elizabeth mentioned that her tribe is struggling with, as well as, in the chat, Kimberly said that she's feeling a little overwhelmed. And I think for that, it would be really great to just, go back to this, how do you start question. But I also wanted to flag, there's actually a really perfect opportunity that's going to be available very soon coming up, called the Tribal Nation Grant Fund in California, which is basically exactly intended for the situation, Elizabeth, that you're talking about, for federally recognized non-gaming tribes or limited gaming tribes, where you can apply to get $500,000 to bring on basically a grant writer to pursue other opportunities. And I think I've heard from a number of different tribes that it feels like you need some kind of capacity. You need like a person to do these massive applications, and that labor can feel really overwhelming on top of your other jobs that different tribal staff members have. So I do want to just advertise that I just heard about this from the governor's office of the tribal advisor, and it seems like a perfect opportunity. I know that they are trying to keep the application very simple because it would kind of ruin the whole point of the thing if that opportunity to get grant writing assistance and money to support grant writing, if that was complicated. So I'll leave the link to that in the chat, and then and I'm happy to speak to anybody who's feeling overwhelmed or wants some orientation to how to get, a staff member on board and who's dedicated to this kind of stuff. I think it's something that I'm really interested in pursuing, at least in California, where there are some resources for that right now.
Thank you, Samu. Getting resources in place, that's an important part of getting started. Thank you so much. Does anybody want to speak to this first topic here, tips for getting started? And maybe Serena, you can just zoom in on that. I don't want people to get too overwhelmed by mural or too many questions or too many topics at once. So maybe just hone in on this first couple of questions here. So what was something you did at the beginning of the adaptation process that was helpful? What planning framework did you use, if any?
So Catherine, since you have your hand up, we'll go ahead and call on you. And if you want to add to this first question, that's great.
I think we're missing an opportune moment to network, because some tribes have more resources than obviously others. And a lot of times people, like some people on the chat or wherever were saying that they don't have the resources to start something. So as simple as a garden, if somebody has information or even seed that they can share with the other tribes, so to help them start, that would be, that's an awesome way to start growing healthy foods for your area. Because if you live in a faraway place like we do, and it's really hard to get some of those things, maybe somebody that has extra can reach out and say, hey, well, how can we get you this? So I think one aspect of this is to really consider networking.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's actually something that is part of the adaptation process that we did in Paula, which was to reach out at the beginning to see what other tribes had done and see what resources we could gather from other tribes. And there are some adaptation plans online that tribes have shared. The ITEP, Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, has templates and tools. And that's one of the reasons that we developed the Tribal Climate Health Project in the first place, was so that we could provide a place like that, like you suggested, Catherine, a network. And as far as this group, yeah, we have all of that information. The contact information for everybody here, I think, is part of our Google Drive, so you can reach out. But I do think that's a good implementation strategy, to have those other tribes that might have the ability to say, here, take some seeds. In fact, we just started a seed bank here in Paula, or not a seed bank, a seed, what are we calling it? Those little free libraries that people build in their houses? We now have a little free seed library where people can get seeds for native plants and grow them in their own gardens. But yeah, that can be a part of the adaptation process. How do you network? And that's what we did. Also, and this is a tough one, but we got a grant to help us fund our work, and then we hired a consultant. So not everybody can do that. And I think that's another place where we can help one another. Our adaptation plan is online, so anybody who wants to can look at Paula's adaptation plan and at least see the framework that we used, and then customize it for their own community. And I see we're putting some of the stuff that's going up in the chat is going into the mural board as well. And Heidi asks from La Posta, is there anything set up now for a seed exchange? Not that I know of, but this is another place where you can get started, is to reach out to local groups and nonprofit organizations that work on climate. So here in Southern California, that's the Climate Science Alliance. There's ITEP, same thing. It can help you develop your adaptation process and your planning framework and do that knowledge sharing or that resource sharing that's going to help others. Osama, your hand is still up, but I think that might be a legacy hand. So I'm going to go to Daniel.
Yes, legacy hand, sorry.
Thank you, ma'am. Elizabeth, if you could, I think it was Elizabeth, correct? If you could give me a call, email me, let's set some time up, let's talk about this. These are some of the things that we do with our tribes. It ranges, you have gaming tribes, you have non-gaming tribes, you have isolated tribes. So it's really difficult for a lot of them to get started. One of the things we began working with is the FEMA idea. And what's nice about the FEMA program is we have worked really well with their tribal consultants. And when we fill out a grant, or one of our tribes fills out a grant, we send it to those FEMA tribal consultants. They edit it, send it back. These are the do's, these are the don'ts. And a lot of times it's not what you say, it's how you say it. We reword whatever you're saying and we fix it and make it possible for you to receive funding on different levels. So there's a lot of different opportunities here. Let me know what I could do to help out.
Yeah, this is great. We've got about 5 minutes left to talk about our stuff. Maybe we can see a little bit about determining the tribe's needs. So determining study area boundaries, which exposures, etc. So I'll say from Paula's perspective, the study area boundaries initially were the tribal trust land boundaries, but that's not going to be relevant to every tribe, especially if you're like my friends at Hamul Indian Village, which is south of me in San Diego County, that have about 4 acres of tribal trust land. So if you're doing a climate adaptation plan, you got to be thinking about a heck of a lot more than just your 4 acres of trust land. And even for Paula, we have 13,000 acres, large by California standards, small by nationwide standards. So we're really looking at a boundary that's more like San Diego County or even Southern California, because that's also where we can get the data. So there is no real data that's specific to how hot does it get exactly at the Paula Administration Building in the middle of the reservation. No, it's going to be more like, what are we seeing happening within the county? Wildfire, flooding, drought, heat, disease incidents. So we ended up ultimately, focusing our implementation of adaptation strategies on what we could do on tribal trust lands. But in terms of preparing for impacts, we had to look at what was happening in the broader region. So I would love to hear what other people considered as part of their determination of where to focus.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from some tribes that we haven't heard from yet.
And Daniel, your hand is still up. I think you also have a legacy hand, right? A disembodied hand. Let's see. And I may take advantage of my knowledge of people on the call to make you talk. Hey, Christian, are you listening?
Yeah, what's up?
So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in Saboba?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, we're looking towards getting a Caltrans grant for climate change adaptation and resiliency planning. So we're working with a consultant known as Blue Tomorrow.
Yes.
And we're going to be utilizing their services to help us go after this grant. Essentially, we want to update our vulnerability assessment, which was previously completed in 2018. So we just want to make sure that some of the vulnerabilities that we do have are still, we're so vulnerable to them, make sure there's not new vulnerabilities that we have. And then essentially, once we do that, we can begin to develop our adaptation plan, which would be exciting because then we're able to, implement some of these things that will help us be more resilient to climate change. So that's something that we're doing right now. And we're looking forward to submit that grant application in February. So if anyone else is interested in pursuing this type of grant for climate change resiliency, just feel free to email me and I can set you guys up with Blue Tomorrow or just give you the grant application packet yourselves. So please feel free to contact me. I'll put my email address in the chat right now.
Thank you, Christian. And I'm thinking about that also as a little bit of a constraint or a landmine. You know, what happens if you don't get the grant?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We do also have gap funding that we're doing next year to help address this if we don't get the grant. I do believe though we do have a high opportunity to go after this grant. A lot of the criteria aligns with what we need. So whenever you do pursue grants, you want to make sure your criteria is matching what they're requesting, so that you have more ability to get after it. But that's a good question, Shasta. If we don't get the grant, then we're just gonna keep pursuing other grants. Keep asking for additional funding, and there's always that gap pot of money that we could have. And if we can't update the vulnerability assessment, then we'll just start going straight to the adaptation planning.
Thanks for that. So looking at my list of folks up here, I'm gonna see if there's anybody else I'm gonna call out from a tribe. Hey, Ryan, are you listening?
Yes, I am listening.
Yay, I'm glad you made it in, because I know you were having a little trouble joining us initially, but do you have anything you'd like to add, and take advantage of the moment to tell us where you're calling in from?
Well, I'm calling in from the Portland area, but it's hard. I work in environmental health, but we have 43 tribes for Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And so, over here, we're actually trying to build a advisory committee with our tribes leading that around environmental health issues. And so the program is new. It came from Indian Health Service. Our tribes said they had enough with Indian Health Service. They pulled their shares. They put it at the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. So we're really trying to build a program. So, it's just great for me to be on here and hear everybody's perspective, because everything you guys are talking about, it's the same with all of our tribes up here. Like, everybody has like a different point of interest, but they're all related and connected. So I just feel like I'm sort of like listening and being a spectator and just trying to pull, ideas together, what I'm hearing from the tribes. But foods and all that is just a huge part, but we also have a lot of contaminants and Superfund sites up here. And there's just so much, it's a little overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's another important thing to talk about in terms of determining boundaries. There's a lot of overlap, and we keep coming back to this idea of folks working together. Your study area boundaries, your exposures and impacts, et cetera. If you are able to work with a local tribal consortium, whether like Lori put in the chat, Pacific Northwest Climate Change Network, there's the, for some reason, I'm suddenly not remembering the name of the intertribal group that includes Washington and Oregon. Our friend Chaz Jones, who is the tribal liaison for the CASC up there, is part of that.
I just met him recently.
Yes, thank you.
And I actually wanted to connect with him and even continue and build something together, because the work is so similar, and there's just so many separate entities as well. And it's I would love to see a way for everybody to come together in a way easier capacity, right, where it's not so separated.
Right.
Would be amazing as well.
Well, and that's something just to put out there as as part of helping to determine your needs, or how to get started really, is what local intertribal groups, here in Southern California, we have the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, we have NAPEC, we have ITEP on a nationwide level, and there's, like you mentioned, ATNI, Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians. Now I remember the acronym. So that is really a great tip for getting started. Reach out to those groups and see what's already been done and how you can share resources. I also just on a yes, exactly. And I just love seeing your people's cursors on our mural board here, where it says things like visiting hippopotamus. That was you, Heidi. Heidi Estrada is the visiting hippopotamus. I want to be like the visiting anteater or something like that. USET's another one. That's the United Southern and Eastern Tribes in the southeast and east of the country. So, all right, we're down to our last few minutes. And Angie, I think you wanted to do some wrap up and some preview for what we're doing next webinar, which will be in the year 2023. So Angie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. So, we're going to continue to try to facilitate these conversations to get the most opportunity for exchange of knowledge and getting to know one another. And so we're learning as we go. If you have suggestions for, we really think a breakout would work well, or whatever it is you think we ought to do here a little differently to facilitate exchange of knowledge, we would love to do it. But thank you for all of that input. And so we are going to just give you a couple of minutes here at the end here. If you can open up that worksheet that we gave you and go ahead and take a second just to look at those reflection questions. They're on page 2 or 3. And I believe, Serena, you're going to go ahead and add those to the chat. Just add the worksheet link back to the chat. Maybe you already have it open. It's just going to show you what that looks like. Just an opportunity for you to do a little bit of self-reflection on some of the questions, just to get down any thoughts that you might have had during the course of today so you can use it in your work. Right.
Hey, Shasta and Angie, do you mind if I just ask a quick question?
Yes, yes, I do. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Go ahead, Osama.
Thank you. Hey, we are planning my team is planning a session on the mental health impacts of climate change. And we're looking for somebody who can speak from a tribal perspective or about the impacts of climate change on the mental health of Native Americans. And I'm wondering if anybody has ideas. We recognize a wide range of expertise. So it could be somebody who can speak to their lived experience or, somebody who studies it in a more formal academic way. But if anybody does have suggestions, would love just your contact. So thank you for looking into your networks, and if you know anybody, please let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Osama.
Maybe that's a good suggestion. We need, maybe we wrap up these meetings with any final announcements. Might be a good idea. All right. So when you have time to just finish that up, those reflections, if you'd like, we welcome you to do that. Let's go back to the wrap-up slide and talk about just what's coming next. So as we know, we meet on a monthly basis. We hope you have a really nice, restful time in between. What we're hoping to do next month is actually have a suggested reading that we'll be discussing like we did this time. So in the meantime, we're going to point you in the direction of the 5th National Climate Assessment. So this is a national report that gets done every few years by the U.S. Global Change Research Project. And the draft just got issued. It's actually out for public comment. And there is a chapter specific to tribes and indigenous peoples. So you all here on the line are I think would be great folks to review that document. And if you got riled up about anything, you could actually submit a comment on it. But either way, I think it's good fodder. It's good reading. It's good. It'll make for a good discussion at our next time we get together. This is one of these. This National Climate Assessment is one of the most important documents in the country in terms of assessing the impacts of climate change. And it's important to make sure that we, just see if there's any value in there for our tribes. But as we go along, if you want to suggest other suggested readings, I want to bring in other examples that are actually coming out of tribes to the extent they're available, and we'll use those for suggested readings as well. So our next time we get together is January 19th. And we're going to be talking about lessons on conducting tribal vulnerability assessments that incorporate TEK, community input, and Western and Indigenous science. And so really we're going to be focusing on that next, right? So today we focused on what do you even want to do? What are your needs? What are you trying to get out of the process? And then diving into what does a vulnerability look like? How did it go well for you? What did you learn out of the process? What successes and challenges did we all face? What would we tell people that are at the beginning of the process to do that, we might have suggested to ourselves if we could have? So that's what we'll get back together and talk about next time. We've got 2 speakers already lined up. And in the meantime, if you have any feedback at all or want to sign up for other sessions, please go ahead and do that. We'll follow up this meeting with a recording and the other materials that we talked about, so you'll have access to all of them. Shasta, any final comments?
No, just delighted to see you all, and in whatever way you celebrate the changing of the seasons. We've got the winter solstice. Wait, solstice, right? Not equinox. Solstice. next week. So I will be celebrating that day and whatever other holidays you celebrate this time of the year. Sending blessings to you all. Icham for being here, and we'll see you next year.
Everybody.
All right. Bye.